Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our third of 7 Cyber Phenomena Roundtables for 2025 on this beautiful New England day. Today's subject is AI risk and AI governance, the CAIO Manifesto. I'm Mike Sheehan, and I run this roundtable series with the Phenomenati team. Today, our facilitator is the Managing Director and CTO of Phenomenati, Stephen Foote. Today, we have an amazing panel, which includes Candy Alexander, Diana Kelly, and Sanjeev Kumar. Candy Alexander is currently the CISO at Nuion. She is an internationally recognized cybersecurity leader with over 35 years of experience guiding global organizations in cyber risk management and strategic security programs. As an executive cybersecurity consultant, she excels at aligning security initiatives with business goals, earning the trust of clients across industries. A respected speaker and media commentator, Candy is a leading voice on cybersecurity trends and workforce development. She currently contributes to the Cloud Security Alliance's AI working groups and has a long-standing commitment to advancing the profession through volunteer leadership. Candy is a past president and longtime board of director of ICER International, where she led the creation of the cybersecurity career lifecycle and co-founded the ICER ESG State of Cybersecurity Profession Research Initiative. She also served as the founding president of the ICER Education and Research Foundation. Diana Kelly is a CISO at Protect AI and is a globally recognized cybersecurity leader. She serves on multiple advisory boards, including WESIS, the Executive Women's Forum, InfoSec World, and the Cyber Future Foundation. Her past leadership roles include cybersecurity field CTO at Microsoft, global security advisor at IBM, and executive positions at Symantec, KMPG, and Burton Group, which is now Gartner. Diane is a passionate advocate for cybersecurity education and ethics, contributing her expertise to organizations like ACM, CompTIA, and Sightline Security. She is also a respected keynote speaker, host of Bright Talks, the Security Balancing Act, and co-author of 2 cybersecurity books. Her honors include Introduction into the Global Cybersecurity Hall of Fame, EWF Executive of the Year, and Audit Board's Top 25 Resilient CISOs. Sanjeev Kumar is the CEO of Efficient Systems, a global technology firm focused on driving digital transformation through emerging technologies. As a strategic technology leader and influencer, Sanjeev shapes and executes visionary roadmaps across industries using cloud, microservices, AI, ML, and advanced analytics. He is a global speaker, co-founder of Alir Ventures, and serves on multiple tech boards, actively contributing to social impact and community initiatives. Before joining Efficient, Sanjeev served as a CTO of Global Financial Services for Dell Technologies. Our facilitator today, Steve Foote, is a seasoned software engineering executive and virtual CTO with deep expertise in building high-impact enterprise applications and leading development teams from startups to large-scale organizations. His work spans finance, healthcare, intelligence, law enforcement, and beyond. He currently leads the development of secure, agile software factories, applying modern practices like DevSecOps, cloud, and AI. A former and early Oracle engineer and co-founder of distributed systems company, Steve holds multiple patents and has authored over 1,000 publications on software, cybersecurity, and enterprise tech. He's also served as an expert witness and board member for several technology firms. We have a lot of material to cover today, so if you have questions, you can put them in chat, and if we don't get to them, we can follow up with you. With all that being said, please join me in welcoming today's briefing facilitator, Steve Foote. Steve, take it away.
Thanks, Mike. And thanks for all the panelists for joining today. So let's dive straight into this now. 2 quick topics here. AI risk, AI governance. The terms of art that most of us are familiar with, certainly the audience members, there's a heavy contingency of security experts in our audience members today. Due diligence, And that, for the purpose of this conversation, we're going to loosely equate the due diligence to the AI risk end of our discussion today. And AI governance is associated with the due care term of art. Now, to provide a little bit more background in this, we've all heard the "we don't need no stinking badges" quote from the Blues Brothers. Let's start off by a small nightmare story. Some of you may have heard this story. Disney engineer, February 2024, brushing up on his own Gen AI skills, installs the Comfy UI web server on a personal computer, not a Disney-owned computer. The Comfy UI web server allows him to use generative AI models privately hosted on that computer, which he downloaded from Hugging Face, TensorFlow, Replicate, whatnot. These were not issues with the models that he downloaded. What happened was he downloaded a workflow that used a private custom node that had been published to the Comfy UI repo for custom nodes. That is a piece of executable code that was running now on his home computer, GPU, Comfy UI web server. That piece of code reached out to the dark side of the internet, pulled in a keylogger, captured his 1Pass credentials, which was not multi-factor, unfortunately for him. And in those the multiplicity of the credentials that were now available to the adversary who could log into 1Pass and see that were his login to his employer, Disney. That ensued where the attacker then logged into Disney, downloaded 44 million posts from a Slack channel, threatened the employee with the disclosure. The employee doesn't disclose, enlists Disney's assistance. The end of the story is the employee gets fired, Disney gets smeared because there's 44 million posts from a Slack channel out there. And of course, everybody and their brother and sister posts that these are AI-related weaknesses. Yeah, there's a little bit of AI-related weakness in here, but really I'm trying to underscore one example of risk. So let me tuck this away and let's get rocking and rolling on our discussion here. This has given rise to the need for what at least Phenomenati is calling the CAIO Manifesto. And the CAIO Manifesto has 10 pieces to it. These outer three are the risk. Understanding, and I know this is governance on it, so we're, don't get confused by that. We're going to touch as time permits and have short discussions in each one of these areas. We're not going to stick religiously to this. This is merely a launching point for our conversation. But net, the risks could be technical, the risks could be ethical, the risks could be legal. And in order to adjudicate those risks, one needs to be aware of them, both structurally as well as cyclically in the workflow processes that are leveraging these AI tools. But then one needs to establish the governance, a little bit of strategy, some ongoing project oversight, designing, whether you're designing these AI systems using open source models or your own home, built models, develop and deploy your systems, and then the V&V, standard verification and validation. Without further ado, let's kick this over to the panel. I'm going to back this off here so we're not, dragged down on this particular one. But let's ask the panel, should I be coming up with my own framework for this, discovering of risks? I can highlight, there's a few here like the NIST AI risk management framework. Panelists, what are you seeing in the way of people taking a structured approach to identifying technical risk, at least?
Well, I'll jump in there. So I think the good news is that you don't have to do it on your own. And the better news is you really don't want to do that. That there's a whole lot of smart people around the world that has come together and have put together some risk framework models. whether it's, from NIST or other organizations, OWASP, whether it be Cost Security Alliance. So again, don't fly alone, because that's when, it really hurts. You can't think and do it all yourself. So leverage those resources that are out there, and readily available and more or less proven. Had it been maybe 5 years ago, yeah, you're kind of like on your own. That's what happens when you're an early adopter. But the good news is that there are resources out there for you to go and leverage and not have to start from scratch.
Thanks, Candy. Diana.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that, Candy was talking about some different kinds of frameworks. And I think that actually what you want to do is you want to start taking a bit of a crosswalk approach. So you could look at something like the NIST AI RMF risk management framework. I think that's a really good starting point for a lot of companies, just as 853 is a really good starting point for a lot of companies. And then you'll probably want to adapt it specifically to your organization, your specific use cases, your needs. And you can do really nice inputs from some of these other frameworks that are out there. And the two that I see getting the most pickup as inputs, not as a standalone, this is all a company looks at, but as an input that they then crosswalk to their larger framework, are MITRE Atlas. Because if you're a MITRE ATT&CK user, they have actually mapped the kill chain within AI over to this new framework called Atlas. So that can be really helpful to understand where things can go wrong and what controls you want to help have those things not go wrong within the kill chain. The other one, Candy already mentioned, which is OWASP. And OWASP has done some great work around LLM, around Gen AI. They do have a top 10. They also have some great resources there on how to understand the risks to your organization that I find sort of help to feed into whatever framework and program you're building. And then, of course, CSA itself has done a huge amount of work in this space and is also providing some really good. So I would, rather than saying pick one or the other, I think, maybe start with a nice broad one like NIST RMF. Make sure that you've adopted it in a way that makes sense for your organization, but also get these feeds from these more technical or specific, guidance like OWASP and like MITRE Atlas.
Thanks, Diana. Sanjeev?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with what Diana and Candy said. And I think that is your logical starting point. One of the highlights of AI that AI is not a technology, it's an aggregation of technologies, right? It is a super technology, right? So when you start looking at some of these frameworks, which has been published in the context of a domain-centric problem, right, you have to think from, almost like an overarching lenses. What I mean by that obviously you have the standards, which is a logical, starting point, but what is the overall aggregate and overlay, right, on top of that? And that is different depending upon who you are. Right, organizational maturity, the practices, the standards which you already have. So I think, taking some of these standards as anchor point is always a good starting point. Overlaying what is contextual and relevant in the context of AI use cases and AI capabilities which you are launching. Because look, I mean, the exponential technologies like AI has, too many, call it, inadvertent injection points, right? And you have to be watchful of some of those things. And no matter which standard you choose, it does not address all those problems in a quite comprehensive fashion. So just watch out for some of those things. But I totally agree with Diana and Candy that taking some of this, the standards is a good starting point so that you are not reinventing the wheel. The framework is already there. The controls are already there, right? Which you have to watch and then run that through your organizational maturity model in the context of your cyber resiliency practices, your operational control practices, your first line of, called defense, second line of defense, and third lines of defense practices. And then you will be able to address some of these concerns quite effectively.
So you triggered a neuron there for me, Sanjeev, with regard to the anchors. And some of these frameworks also include principles I'll just quickly drill in here, and we'll take just a very quick peek at some of these principles. And I know this is small for the folks in the audience, so I'm going to sort of zoom in here. But the OECD AI principles, you can Google for that one. It'll come up. UNESCO principles, Asilomar AI principles, CNIL AI action plan. But the one that I think is more approachable personally is this particular one, the IEEE Initiative on Ethics of Autonomous and Intelligent Systems. And that actually is a good segue point. So let's tuck this one away for now, and let's pop open the AI ethics and bias mitigation. An example risk here, one of my favorites because I happen to like him as an actor, but Tom Hanks. Everybody see the deep fake of Tom Hanks where somebody made a commercial with Tom as a testimonial. I want to say it was for insurance or something like that. It was not a major brand name, but absolutely Tom had to come out and do his own press release to say, that's not me. I didn't buy into that. I didn't authorize that. I'm not even paid for it. And then there's the other side of it, which is models that sample artists, whether it's music or digital artists or physical artists, physical medium artists. There's a real challenge for tracking the ethical use of AI. And the final point, I'll kick it over to the panel again on this one, but software development. Not every AI model that writes code has clear and present right to the copyrights of the code that it trained from. Much of the code that these apps train on, these models get trained on, that comes out of GitHub and whatnot, they do have license restrictions. They're GP general purpose utilization, but not commercial utilization. And if you've got a long process by which you've got a junior developer generating code using an AI model that's been trained on the restricted copyrighted software technology that is supposed to be used underneath a certain license, it's not ethical to be actually generating the code off from them. So once again, over to the panelists, what are you seeing in the field of ethics and bias mitigation?
So I think one thing that's really important to keep in mind is that bias is something that occurs in AI. It's not always necessarily bad, right? AI model files are really just a series of weights and biases. And sometimes we want it to be weighted to one thing or another. I was using an AI generator and I wanted to have a picture of a fox that looked a little mean, and it kept making basically this adorable fox picture, and I had to keep telling it to weight towards mean, because I wanted to have this fox be something that was going to steal data, steal important information. So it's really more about understanding the purpose that you're building the system for and making sure that you've thought about the different dimensions of bias, because there are all kinds of, there's association bias, there's adjacency bias, there's all different kinds of bias, and made sure that whatever you're building has had that bias removed. And very often that goes back to the data that you train it with. And how do you get bias out? Look, we're all going to be biased as people, and systems, AI drifts into bias. So the best way is to get a lot of people thinking about how you're going to build, what you're going to do with it. And a really good example of this, and I was lucky enough to be with one of the scientists that actually trained this original facial recognition, but one of the very highly used original facial recognition systems was called out by Joe Belwani at MIT for being very accurate with one cohort of faces, and then sort of going down the spectrum to extreme inaccuracy. And the cohort it was very accurate on were lighter skinned males. The cohort it was the least accurate on were females with darker skin. And this was not intentional. I actually, as I said, I was with one of the scientists of the training, and he said, those were our faces. We trained it on our faces. So there was no intent for it not to be inaccurate with any cohort. It was just, they said, this is the data set we have, our faces. We're going to train on our faces. So it's at that point, right, step back and say, if we're going to use a system to look at all the faces in the world and to do identification of them, then we need to train on all the different kinds of faces in the world so that we have high accuracy with that. So I think that that's the most important thing for people to step back, because sometimes we just go to like, I'm not biased or I'm not, it's not that. It's really more just thinking about what you're going to be using that system for and ensuring that you've then created a system that is going to be usable and accurate for that entire user space.
Well put. Well put. Candy, I see you're off mute.
Yeah, so I appreciate the heavy technology mindsets here, but let's back that right up, right? As an organization, you need to cognitively say, we are going to adopt AI in an ethical and safe and trustworthy manner. So what does that mean? So then the next step, just like, we're just repeating our practices that have been tried and true with traditional security policy. What is the intent of the organization? What are your goals and objectives? To have unbiased, trustworthy, safe AI use. Next step, how are you going to train your engineers, your end users, your business community as to what does that really mean? And then thirdly, to make sure that there are, those practices put in place. How are you going to leverage the technology? And that's what Diana was saying. But I would even go one step further, right? I was recently reading, it goes back to risk assessment, right? Now think about this. If for those of you who are into privacy as well, a lot of privacy practices, you have to do a PRA for new systems that are brought into the organization, privacy risk assessment. Is the use of this system going to introduce some privacy issues? If so, what's the scale of those issues? How are you going to mitigate those issues? Think about the practice of doing an ERA, an ethical, right? Unbiased, right? How are you going to do that same type of assessment on that use case? And oh, by the way, again, it's specific to the use case. So you're going to be doing it over and over and over again. And then before you know it, by repetitive, consistent practice, now people are familiar and they're aware of how to do that.
Really good point. Really good point. There's general counsels applauding you everywhere right now, Candy. Sanjeev, any thoughts?
No, I think it was well captured by Candy and Diana. You have to be very intentional, right, about these things. And we should not be doing things because we just could. Right, and that needs to follow, obviously, the privacy concerns, ethical concerns. And what I mean by that, look, the data universe, which is a representative sample of the use case which you are targeting, is non-negotiable. Right, you have to, all these biases which Diana was talking about, why did they occur? Because, we trained the model on the data set which had the intrinsic bias, whether we wanted to recognize it, whether we really detected it in time, or whether that was just the fastest route to delivery of some capability. Because what is happening, there is a mass hysteria, right, which is happening in the AI. Everybody is thinking that if they are not doing something with the AI, they are already behind. Right, and that is not the right mindset, because AI is not the solution for everything, but obviously it is one of the probably most dominant technologies we have seen in a generation, right? But bringing the right governance attributes, right, bringing the, call it intrinsic considerations, which really makes this responsible AI a reality, right? Is very important. And either you do that by practice, or some of the governance attributions which you have within the organization, or basically government is going to force you to do that by some of the rules and policies. I give you an example. Right, when you go to the financial services, and if there are robo-advisory who is deploying your money for the particular set of returns, right, subject to your risk appetite, what is the designation of that robo-advisor? It's not a machine. For that bank, it is a registered independent advisor. Right, if anything goes wrong, you are liable. Same thing needs to happen with the AI. You cannot just unleash the power of the AI without being, worried about the consequences, right? And that's why, some of the safety, security, privacy, unbiased data sets, or, the ethical and responsible AI is non-negotiable. Right, because ultimately, right, the legal clauses will be becoming mainstream, where you will be liable for any unintended consequences of the AI. That's why I think it is a very important topic. Let's not forget, in the rush to basically deploy something because it looks pretty cool, that we are AI native, or we are basically really advanced breed in the AI. Do this with the responsible. Right. And that's what I think, that it is very important topic. And this is still a premature area, right? The signals are weak, but as basically we are making more and more use cases production ready, some frameworks are emerging, and most of the people are trying to, obviously conform to some of these ethical practices.
So you just triggered, that was brilliant, by the way, Sanjeev. You triggered the thought, and I'll use it as a segue to the last of the three risks that we talked about, and that is the legal and regulatory compliance. Now, for our audience's benefit, Sanjeev's actually with us today. He has stepped out of a board meeting to join this call and have this discussion. Sanjeev, what kind of conversations are you having at the board level, right? Not necessarily your board, but more abstract, with regard to the evolving of existing laws, the privacy laws like GDPR, AI-specific laws like the EU's AI Act. Sanjeev's company is an international operations, and even some of the emergent laws like Singapore, Australia, South Africa, India, South Korea, Japan. Well, what's going on at the board?
It's a very hot topic, Steve, I can tell you, right? Everybody wants to know that, what are the guardrails, and what are the best practices, and what are the conformance requirements which they have to stick to not only, satisfy this emerging, call it geo laws, right? Or, the different country specific laws, but also doing things the right way. Right, look, these are not orthogonal in my mind, that you have to conform to certain risk and regulatory requirements while also building some healthy practices within the organization. Right, so we used to, we used to this term, right, in the risk domain, that, complying while simplifying. Right, that was basically, 15 years ago, I delivered a keynote in Miami, and the topic was that complying while simplifying. Do not look at the risk and the regulatory conformance from just basically a tick box exercise. Look that as an opportunity to really build resilient operational and business controls. Right, and you will be doing a lot of good to the organization, rather than basically just becoming that the CISOs or the chief regulatory officers whose job is to comply with the mandates. So at the top of the mind of all these boards is the question that how do we stay ahead of it, and what are the best practices? Are there frameworks? Are there the established success stories which we can adopt, and we can scale within the organizations to deal with these things, right? That, GDPR, I think there are many organizations who are at the forefront of compliance with some of these things, because these were not policies, these were basically rules, right? You have to do it, right? And they are taking advantage of the resiliency which they have built over past, 10 years or so, and now incorporating and injecting that into new AI workflows. Right, so just a long answer to a short question. Top of the mind.
That was brilliant.
Yeah,
that
top
was
of the mind for the board. Everybody is looking for an answer, or basically some helping hands, or the best practices which they can adopt, so that they start doing things in the right way.
That's brilliant. And Diana and Candy, you're both Chief Information Security Officers, so I have no illusions that the regulatory space, the legal ramifications for your respective corporations keep you up at night. Are you briefing boards and sharing your concerns with them?
Well, I do find, I mean, the board tends to look at the CISO as tell me everything related to information digital risk. So there's almost no way to avoid bringing that conversation in now because, most companies have, whether they like it or not, they've adopted AI. The other day, I just got a little note from Google saying, "You've got Gemini now." And I was like, "Thanks." So I mean, that's sort of, it's everywhere. And if you're doing any kind of development, of course, you've got dev teams that are using the code generation. A lot of companies are using Copilot. So it's everywhere. So it's really become, I think, part of our risk. So we have to explain that to them. What's kind of interesting is that I haven't seen compliance really catch up as much. I mean, we have ISO standards around isms for AI, but it's separate from 27001. You look at SOC 2 and there's sort of the special addendums that people can do around AI. But if you look at the core standard, it's not embedded there yet. So I think it's going to be interesting as this becomes more and more embedded within our organizations. They're going to be part of our compliance programs, and we're going to have to be reporting up that way. But for now, at least from what I'm doing and seeing, it's really it's you're incorporating this as part of your overbriefing of, if you're explaining what the digital information risk is at the organization, AI has to be a part of that conversation for the board.
Yeah, slightly different take, which is not, I've been told it's not uncommon for me, but, I think about it, advising and educating, whether it's the C-suite or the board of directors, right? We have a long journey that we have traveled and continue to travel, and it's basing that education and awareness on the fundamentals. First, it was security compliance. What are, the regulatory requirements? What is the cost associated with either the risk mitigation or the risk itself or whatever? So from a cybersecurity perspective, then along came privacy, right? So now we're talking about GDPR, CCPA, CPRA, so on and so forth, right? And of course, let's not forget, here in the United States, every single state has their own privacy, right? So I think we've got that under our belt. So when it comes to, advising executive and board leadership, it's building on that foundational knowledge as to what now is the use of AI in the organization. What is that introducing? Educating them that there are, regulatory requirements that are slow to come, but they're continuously being monitored, like we do with privacy, like we do with cyber. It's just another factor, right? And so advising them, here's where the current state is. This is where I feel it's going. This is how we look at it within the organization. And I like to break things down simply for, leadership to understand. Their job is not cybersecurity. They don't understand cybersecurity, nor do I want them to practice cybersecurity or privacy. Let me advise you as to what those factors are. Introduction of AI within the organization exposes potentially this amount of exposure, window of exposure for any type of data, whether that's PII, sensitive data, whatever you want to call it, proprietary data. There's the window of exposure there. And then from a cyber perspective and a threat vector perspective, it's this. So what is the total, combination, aggregation of those factors? This is what we need to worry about based on prioritization of business, right? How's that going to impact the business strategy and goals, right? And then what's the investment to take care of it? So it really is the same conversations that we've been having for some time. It's just now we have a new threat vector.
And one that can be challenging for people to get their head around, because the example that I showed earlier with the Disney employee, that threat vector came in through, the individual's one pass single, credential login, which then exposed his professional logins into Disney, and the rest is in the press. So there's just so many holes in the sieve. We're well into half the webinar, so let's take this opportunity we're going to flip over and start to talk about the sort of proactive governance, focus more on that. Obviously, we're blending both risk and governance anyway because they're inseparable. The CIO Manifesto suggests, I'll cover a couple of these real quick, that a corporation adopts an AI strategy so that there's malice of forethought, there's deliberateness in the actions. You do not want to find yourself representing your company being deposed in a court of law as the defendant, if you will, in a plaintiff's lawsuit because something's gone wrong, whether security breach, unethical use of AI, whatever it might be. If you certainly want to perform the due care of establishing a corporate AI strategy, and there are some frameworks to lean on. Frameworks, I'm reusing the term from earlier, but the ISO 42001, just as a case in point. Below that, and in the interest, I'm going to accelerate through. I'm going to drop, down for discussion on this one, designing AI. But I'll also just quickly show the project oversight. You're not just going to establish the corporate strategy with a set of policies associated with that. You're going to indoctrinate that into your organizations, the rhetorical you, and consider what does success look like. Would you have something such as an AI model life cycle? What I'd like to show you in the context of designing it in is another example. So let's tuck this over here for just a moment and roll up the overview, unroll our earlier diagram, load up. Let's take a look at something that's not on your radar, robotics. And I want to show this to you. This is a very concrete example in the manufacturing space with the use of robotics to accelerate the assembly of all sorts of hard goods, if you will. The company is a real company, German-based company, now U.S. Parent company, Micropsy, and they use an industrial PC with a webcam mounted on the arm of the robot. And we're talking about gantry and Cartesian robots. We're not talking about humanoidal robots. These things are doing pick and place actions. And the video recording, as the human imitates for the robot by moving the robot's hand, they record the videos and the telemetry of where the hand is. Those are known as episodes. They're uploaded to an AWS cloud footprint that Micropsy owns, and there's a model is generated. They call it a skill, which is good vernacular in this particular example. The skill takes about an hour to generate, and then it's made available to that and only that customer's industrial PC, which would then download that and inference. Use the model for the particular skill in conjunction with, now this is the agentic AI footprint. We haven't really talked about that. So I'm throwing it into the conversation here. The context at runtime, the webcam's still watching the robot, and it knows frame by frame by frame by frame where that arm is, and it uses the skill, the model that it's downloaded to inference, what's the next best move for this robot? And it actually provides that control to the robot real time. Okay, so I wanted to use that as an exemplar here to put the context in place when we're talking about designing AI into business systems. Sometimes it's not just Steve's a graphics designer and he's using Midjourney to, create the next marketing campaign. Sometimes it's actually a hard science. Over to the panelists, what are you seeing? What are you running into in the way of challenges for designing AI into the systems?
Well, I think what you're raising is a really, important but very complex and nuanced point, which is that we are embedding AI into all forms of our business, whether it's somebody who is trying to figure out how to write an email, how to write a memo, a press release that's going out, all the way to what you're talking about, where we're getting into very autonomous, robotic, and agentic systems are, emergent. And agentic systems are complex, autonomous chains of AI that are taking action. So, as we look at this, I think there are a couple of things. You started out initially with talking about, policy and governance. And I've seen a lot of organizations sort of try and create an AI policy as though it's this, and we tend to go there in tech. We tend to go, oh, here's this new other thing. I remember there for a while, there were going to be chief mobility officers. They would just be in charge of the mobile devices, and it's like that, which sounds kind of goofy 15, 20 years on, but that was a discussion point at one point. So I think with AI, rather than creating an AI policy that's going to apply to how your marketing team generates new images or your customer service team creates bots to interact with your customers or your dev team incorporates code, I think what makes a lot more sense, or even as you get into these very complex, critical, fully autonomous environments, I think what makes more sense is to really start thinking about how AI goes into each of your policies. So if you have acceptable use, you help people understand what they can and they can't do, your average user, what they can and they can't do with AI. If you've chosen to go with big AI foundation model A rather than B, you help people understand, just as if you're using a ticketing system, right? People just don't run out and, they get Jira and they get ServiceNow and they get Linear, right? You say, this is what we're using, and then people use it. So starting to treat AI that way. The same within your software development lifecycle. Can people use code? Can they cut and paste code from open source repositories, from maybe, community areas, right? And just put them in? Well, if you're going to generate code with AI, it's the same thing. You have to test it statically. You have to test it dynamically. You have to make sure it's on the right license. So starting to think about just weaving it into each one of these processes, and we get to what you're talking about, which is fully autonomous, there's going to have to be a lot of governance and oversight to take care that the company has thought through each aspect of that, because that autonomy, we're going to get the potential to have chained failures. And if you've ever had a really good hallucination back from an AI, some of them are really, really, I got fooled the other day by when I asked it a question I didn't know the answer to. I'm always telling people, don't ask it a question if you don't know the answer. I asked a foundation model for a question for a quote of an author, and it said it came from a book that quote actually didn't come from by that author. And I was like, but it sounded so convincing. I accepted it for a few minutes, and then I went, it's really in that book. And then I went and found, because it's an older book, I found it on archive.org. I found the full text, and I was able to just grep, right? Just do a find for it, and it wasn't in there. So now think about that happening in these changed autonomous environments. So the governance is going to come in very, very, very strongly. And also, as we look at some of these new emerging protocols to tie this together, like Model Context Protocol, with great access to our data lakes, to our entire productivity suite information through APIs, making sure that we've really created, now this is where new policy is going to be required. Policy around the security of these much more complex models. So earlier in the chain, I think if it's your developers, they need to understand how to use code securely. They haven't been writing every line of code themselves for a while. So how do we, there've been libraries, dependencies, right? How do we bring it in? Same with your graphic design people, how to bring in images, whether it's coming from AI or it's coming from a free source, or you're getting it from a paid Getty Images. So I think, start incorporating that, but then also there's going to be some new thinking and new oversight and governance around these highly autonomous systems.
Great points. Great points. Candy, you're already off mute.
Yes.
I suspect you have a few thoughts.
I'm dying here because I'm going to get nerdy on you. All right.
Next,
So let's dive right into that. I agree, of course, with Diana, right? Policies and governance, and that's all fabulous. But let's get into the real world and the real minds of the dev guys and girls, right? And I think we really need to think about their practices, right? We all know security by design principles and the engineering principles and all of that. But I think it really starts, the old cliche, let's build it in rather than bolt it on, So, you know, getting them to really realize that when you're going and doing your agile development or whatever, you know, process you're using today, that when you go and come up with a story that you document it. This is part of the 42001 from ISO, right? You need to document. And I like to put things simply, and I say use cases. Let's, you know, whatever that thing is that you're looking to design, that solution, you need to document and decide what are, for example, the software supply chain. What is it, right? That's a factor that needs to be, you know, documented and evaluated. Then looking at the ramifications, once you have the wireframe of what it is you're wanting to design and build and code, right? What are the components of it? What are the interactions with it? And then you go and you do the design review. I mean, geez, this is, you know, goes back to like the beginning of software engineering, right? The old code reviews. Let's look at it from that perspective. But now you're going to be looking at it from the traceability aspect. Right. There's a whole bunch of new things that are now introduced with AI, traceability. What is the legacy of the data? Is the data clean? Do you have the right to access that data and incorporate that data within the AI use? So there's a whole lot of principles and or aspects that you need to pull in to those design documents, and then they need to be reviewed. And oh, guess what? Once you have that done, then you need, you know, the QA process. Pull in, you know, your tools, and ensure that it's going to be acting the way you expect it to be, and that it's a repeatable expectation, right? And then finally, don't forget any time that there are any changes in any component of that design, it has to go through that review once again. And it's only then are you going to have confidence in regards to the trustability of that implementation.
That's great insight. Sanjeev, I know your company actually, one of the many initiatives is around smart cities. And that's a very atypical, that's not a standard, as you know, information system. I mean, it's all in the field. The data input comes from the traffic patterns and whatnot. What are you seeing from the ramifications there of designing AI in? And then right straight across the spectrum here, all the way to how do you know, verify and validate its behavior?
Yep. No, excellent question. I think, you know, some of the principles outlined by Diana and Candy still holds true, right? The difference is, look, now we are living in an age of decentralized intelligence, right? Word is highly disaggregated, distributed, still composable, right? Which is the foundation of agents, right? Diana was talking about, if these are the autonomous systems, these are nothing but the network agents, which is working conforming to an orchestration patterns to deliver certain outcome. That's the definition, right? Obviously, these agents are coming from anywhere and everywhere, right? This is not what you have built. You are relying on the third-party services. So going back to the principles, which was mainstream 15 years ago, how do you build the adaptive controls in the execution? Right, even if these are the fully autonomous systems, what is the definition of the adaptive controls for the trust establishment between these, agents? Again, you can take a page from the zero trust principles, right? These are ephemeral trust vectors, right? These are, obviously short-lived, the trust relationships. But you have to verify the authenticity and obviously the intent of this agents who is coming as a network, the ecosystem to deliver certain things. Obviously, simple principles from the data world, which is the RBAC and ABACs, attribute-based access controls, role-based access controls, and obviously your call it PEP, right? The policy enforcement plans. All those concepts apply here, What is different, right, in the industrial or smart cities, that these are basically working in the real life on the edges with basically form factors, which is really miniaturized, right? So that creates a number of other problems, right? Even if you have the inference, how are you going to really unleash the power of inference on the edge in the real time? The performance needs to be deterministic, right? It's, the architectures and the infrastructure is basically different, right? These are not the hierarchical systems which we see in the corporate world today, right? Because latency cannot be tolerated. And if latency cannot be tolerated, that means processes needs to run in the hardware itself, right? That means the entire software is a flattened structure on the edge world, right? It is not basically a process is kicking another process and that is kicking another process. Everything is running with, nanoseconds latency profiles. Because if something does not happen in 2 milliseconds, somebody is going to die. Right. So in the smart cities, whether, those are the smart mobility, critical infrastructure, industrial premises, right? Our point of view is, can you unleash the power of extreme telemetry, real time, the data capture, inference on the edge with the right form factor to make every inanimated objects in the world animated, right? Which is intelligent. And that's where a lot of governance things, comes into the picture. One thing which I learned out of Dell, right? So obviously credit goes to them. When they started looking at the AI, probably 10 years ago, right? That how we should be thinking about the AI, they came with these lenses, right? Which is AI in, AI on, and AI for. AI in is basically your embedded intelligence, which you were talking about, right? In the context of the industrial technologies. AI on is basically all the workflows from the central control plane, orchestration plane, provisioning plane, and observability plane, which you have created to build higher level of intelligence, right? On the substrate, or basically call it, the different corporate system. And AI for is what you are delivering as a value-added services. Going back to Diana's point and Candy's point, it cannot be an overlay, right? It cannot be basically just tool-centric, right? It cannot be just the thread-centric, right? This needs to be embedded, not the overlays over overlays. That's not how it is going to work. So in the smart city context, think about all these aggregated competencies, right? How do you really look at the data detection, model detection, real-time telemetry, inference on the edge with the right form factor, adaptive controls in the execution, building this intelligence as a highly networked distributed intelligent system. Right? All those things come together when you deliver an edge capabilities, which is really, really smart. So I think all the discussion points which you had there, Steve, is relevant, right? And you cannot address these things, right, unless until you have an overarching AI strategy framework, right? That, the lineage, provenance, safety, security, reliability, verifiability, those cannot be negotiable. If you miss on any of those things, right, something bad is going to happen. And unless until you have this corporate strategy, which is highlighting the intent, right, the courses of actions, your crawl, walk, run stages of really scaling this AI with intrinsic controls and security and privacy guardrails, you won't be successful.
Something bad's going to happen, without the forethought, without the preparation and whatnot. But aside from that, though, I got to tip my hat, because the Smart Cities Initiative, I think, is both brilliant and fascinating. So the verification and validation topic, I know I just jumped across the center and we're about 5 minutes before the finish. I got to show you that something bad's gonna happen. This is an interesting development. Not sure if our audience is familiar with it. Software coding, we all know that there will be no more software developers in the future because it will all be AI. Okay, all right, so be it. The big tool right now is Cursor AI, very, very popular. It's a thick client. It's actually a port of Visual Studio that runs on the developer's desktop and can be configured to use either privately hosted or published coding models, obviously the likes of ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, whatnot. You can also train your own models and plug Cursor AI into it. All right, why am I bringing this up and what bad could happen. Well, as it turns out, many of the big large language models, but also the small language models, are hallucinating. You heard Diana mention that earlier. They will hallucinate dependencies, class files, frameworks, and I mean, software dependency frameworks. They will hallucinate those. And oddly enough, there was an article about a month ago. I apologize, I don't have the URL handy, but they hallucinate repeatedly on the same made up frameworks, libraries, dependencies. There is already a black market for the names of those dependencies. It's called slop squatting, S-L-O-P squatting, where the adversary creates their own manifest. It creates the fake dependency, not the dependency itself, but creates the payload to behave as the dependency. And the accelerated process that you heard each of the three speakers talk about in adopting and leveraging AI from a bug tracking, oh, we need a patch, we got to get an updated version of our dependency, right out to a push to the code repository, do the compilation, run the unit tests, it looks good, do the security penetration, all looks good. You don't realize you're carrying a malware payload that you just unknowingly built into your executable process. Now imagine that it's not running in front of a human, it's part of Sanjeev Smart City's deployment. So it's a fully autonomous environment. Very scary stuff. The more we're aware of these things, the more able we are to defend against them. So let me pop open the overview. I know it's a little cluttered with the other stuff in the background, but the premise here is that, first of all, you need a belly button, whether it's a CAIO, it's an outgrowth of the CISO role. That's all individually, independent decisions made from the corporation. This manifesto is by no means the only answer, but it is an answer that begins to try and tackle and balance the risks and illuminate those risks, as you've heard from our panelists today, along with what is a reasonable, practical approach towards governing rather than just saying, no AI. That's not the answer. How do we then embrace that? So we've got 2 minutes. Mike, I think I should kick it back over to you to wrap it up. And I just want to tip my hat to Candy, Diana, Sanjeev. Always a pleasure to have a conversation with you. Never enough time from my perspective, but we're almost at the top of the hour. So Mike, bring us home.
Yeah, well, thank you, Steve, and thank you, Candy, Diana, and Sanjeev. That was a great session. We did record the session for those of you who might want to share with your teammates. We will get the recording out to you in the next couple of days. If you're interested in talking to any of the panelists, let me know, and I'd be happy to facilitate an introduction. Our next roundtable is on Wednesday, May 28th, Privacy Risks, the Data Privacy Life Cycle, Cradle to Grave, at the same bat time, 12 p.m. Other than that, that concludes the briefing. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and enjoy the remainder of this beautiful day. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks, Steve.